They called her a pretty toy, soft, fragile, the kind of girl who should never have been handed a sniper rifle, let alone dropped in the middle of a killing field of ice. But they didn't know the blizzard like she did how to breathe in its stillness, how to become its ghost. When the wind howled and the world turned white, Elena Madsen didn't disappear. She hunted. And that morning when the first shot echoed across the frozen ridge, they finally saw her not as a pretty toy, but as the hunter the storm had made her. If you believe that courage can be as silent as falling snow, and that a woman's quiet determination can change everything, stay with us. And if you want more stories of grit, quiet heroism, and impossible odds, make sure to follow and subscribe, because the world needs to hear voices like hers. The wind off the Arctic shelf slammed into the camp at dawn, rattling loose canvas and sending a spray of ice crystals swirling across the yard. Trucks groaned as their engines coughed awake, and boots crunched through the hard, packed snow in steady formation. It was the kind of cold that bit straight through gloves and turned every breath into a ghostly plume. Private Elena Madsen stood alone by the ammo crates, her face half-shadowed under the hood of her parka. She was small, lean, with dark blonde hair braided tight and tucked against her collar. Her features were sharp, almost delicate, the sort of face you might see on a magazine cover if you ignored the faint scars on her knuckles and the hard focus behind her pale blue eyes. The guys called her Pretty Toy when they thought she couldn't hear. Pretty Toy because no one believed a girl like her could survive a place like this. They'd point and nudge each other, make jokes that weren't clever enough to sting. Elena let them. She didn't answer, didn't rise to it. She just kept breaking down her M24, reassembling it, checking every millimeter of carbon scarring until the bolt ran smooth as ice. If you watched close, you might have noticed how her hands never shook even in the cold. Sergeant Brooks barked orders from across the yard, voice raw from the wind. The squad gathered in loose clusters, adjusting their gear, eyes rolling as they waited for this day's endless drills. Elena shouldered her pack without a word and joined them, slotting in at the edge of Delta Squad. "Barbie's packing heat today," a corporal muttered behind her, loud enough for the others to hear. Someone snickered. Elena ignored it. They didn't see the way she took in the ridgeline beyond the base, how she marked the high rocks, the drift patterns, the choke points in the pass. They didn't see her noticing the crow perched on the antenna tower, or how it was facing away from the wind, a sign of a heavier front moving in. They didn't see the hunter. That morning when the order came to move out on perimeter watch, the sky was a washed-out pewter, the air so dry it burned in her nose. The snow under their boots squeaked with each step, muffled only by the gusting wind. Elena fell in line, calm, breathing slow, eyes forward. Nobody offered her a handshake or a smile or a friendly slap on the shoulder. That was fine. Let them think she was fragile. Let them believe she'd break. The storm was coming, and Elena Madsen had been waiting her whole life for storms. They were 5 miles out from camp when the blizzard found them. It didn't blow in gently, didn't announce itself with a polite drift of flakes. It roared down off the ice shelf like a living thing, swallowing the squad in a wall of white, so dense it seemed to erase the world. At first, no one spoke. The men squinted, cursing, trying to keep formation as Brooks called out their heading, but the wind shredded his voice, turning it into nothing. Visibility fell to nothing. Even the boots ahead of you might vanish if you blinked. Panic crept in quiet at first, then loud. Someone started shouting. Another lost their sense of direction, veering off the path. Elena didn't panic. She crouched low, feeling the ground under her palms, letting her body anchor to the subtle slopes and ridges she'd memorized hours before. The snow stung her skin, needled into her eyes, but she kept them open. Breathe, she told herself. Breathe like Montana winters, like she had with her father teaching her to track deer across white fields. A figure emerged out of the blur, flailing, half sobbing. Corporal Anders, face gray with fear. His rifle was clutched wrong, safety still on. He could barely stand. "Elena," he shouted, voice cracking. "Where the hell is the squad? I can't see shit." She reached for him, steady, grabbed his collar. Down she ordered, pointing to a drift they could use as cover. Anders hesitated, eyes wild. The wind slammed into them again, nearly toppling him. Elena dragged him toward the snowbank, ignoring his weight, ignoring the pain tearing across her shoulder as she yanked him out of the gale. "Stay low," she said. "Keep your face down. Listen." Around them, white devoured every landmark. It was like being buried alive, but colder, crueler. Memories rose, unbidden Montana, a field that had gone white overnight, her father's calm voice behind her. "A blizzard is not your enemy if you know how to move inside it." She made Anders crawl beside her, forcing him to focus on their hands on their knees on each solid inch of earth. One foot, then another. Find the ridgeline. Feel the way the snow settled. Up ahead, a faint silhouette appeared, Sergeant Brooks, trying to rally the rest. They were tangled near a stand of dead spruce, half lost already. Elena took point without asking permission. They needed to cross open ground. She scanned the wind for anything off any motion that didn't belong. That's when she saw a flash of movement along the tree line, too fast, too purposeful. A scope. Her heartbeat didn't spike, it steadied. Elena Brooks called, barely audible. "What do you see?" "Sniper," she said, loud enough to cut through the howling air. "South tree line, 50 yards. Brooks's eyes widened. He was about to shout an order when the first round snapped past them, slicing snow off a boulder. The men dove for cover. Elena stayed upright. She dropped to one knee, ignoring the wind, ignoring the ice burning her lips. One smooth motion, scope up. She tracked the shimmer, a muzzle flash in the dark of a spruce bough. "Breathe." Her father's voice, "You fire," between heartbeats. She squeezed. One round, clean. A black shape toppled backward into the snow, disappearing from sight. The squad was silent for a heartbeat, then Brooks barked again. "Move, we move now!" They scrambled forward, following the path Elena had burned through the white. No one questioned her, not this time. By the time they reached the evac point, half frozen and half blind, the men were looking at her differently. No cheers, no jokes, but something quieter, a recognition. As the medevac rotors thundered overhead and floodlights cut through the storm, Elena looked back once at the forest. A single crow, half frozen, clung to a broken branch. She nodded at it, and in that moment it felt like the storm was nodding back. She was no pretty toy. She was the hunter. The base smelled like rust and oil and frozen mud when they returned. Elena barely noticed. Her mind was still in the forest, replaying the shot, the ghostly crack of her rifle vanishing into the wind. Back in the armory, she cleaned her weapon in silence. The men spoke around her now, not to her, but with a different edge. No laughter, no teasing. That was fine. Respect was colder than friendship, but it lasted longer. She finished polishing the scope, checked the bolt again. Her fingers felt stiff, the chill still crawling under her nails. A medic had insisted on looking at her cheek where a piece of ice had cut her open. She'd waved him off. Out on the practice field, Sergeant Brooks was already debriefing, voice a tired rasp. Another mission had come down the wire, a medical convoy trapped beyond a mountain pass. No air support, no armor. Just a perimeter detail and a map already half buried in snow. "Delta team will flank the ridge," Brooks announced. "We'll set overwatch here, here, and here." His gloved finger jabbed at the spots. "Madsen, you're going high ground." Someone muttered, "Send the Barbie up in a blizzard." Brooks didn't blink. She's the only one who can see through it. The men went quiet. Hours later, under a sky bruised with incoming snow, Elena pulled her hood low and headed out alone. She carried only what she needed, rifle, a battered sidearm, a thermal pack, and an old rabbit's foot her father had given her, worn smooth by years of worry. By the time she reached the ridge, the storm had already begun to build. Wind clawed at her parka, rattling the scope on her rifle. She found a hollow between two slabs of ice and went prone, belly to the ground, face pressed against the rifle stock. Slowly, she started to disappear. The snow layered over her back clung to her hood, drifted along her arms until she was less a person than a shape in the ice. Her breath came slow measured. She painted two ragged stripes of black ash across her cheeks, a hunter's mark, but also a piece of herself, a reminder of Montana's old woods. Hours passed. She did not move. Her world shrank to the glint of her scope, the sweep of the tree line, the faint pop of frost as it cracked under the weight of her heartbeat. Then she saw it. A flicker wrong. Movement across a break in the trees, too smooth, too rhythmic. Another shooter. He was good. Position perfect, using a sunken log as cover. He'd already settled into his nest, scoping the road where the convoy would pass. Elena tightened her jaw. She waited. The wind gusted hard enough to shake her sight picture. She let it. When it eased, she exhaled. Her finger squeezed. When the enemy sniper went limp, collapsing sideways, skull shattered. No one else on that ridge ever saw the shot. No one but Elena. As the convoy crawled through the pass later that day, trucks idling through chest-high drifts, the Overwatch radioed in the all-clear. Madsen confirmed. She clicked the mic once. Confirmation enough. By the time Delta Squad came to pull her from the ridge, Elena was nearly frozen solid. They had to pry her from the snow bones, aching muscles, screaming in protest. Someone swore when they saw the black stripes on her cheeks. She's a damn ghost, a private whispered. She didn't answer. She just stood, eyes on the forest, waiting for the next hunt. By the third week of winter, the snow no longer felt like weather. It felt like a war of its own, patient and merciless. Elena moved through it as if she'd been born in its silence. Every step left barely a trace. Every breath slowed until it vanished. Delta Squad had begun to trust her, but that trust was still uneasy, balanced on the thin blade of survival. No one forgot what she looked like, no matter how many shots she made. They still called her pretty toy sometimes, but only behind her back and quieter now. Orders came at dawn, a recon sweep near the old transmission tower. A band of hostiles was moving closer to the perimeter, trying to choke the convoy route. Too many for a single sniper to handle, but not enough to justify pulling back. Brooks gave the briefing calm as ever. We neutralize them before they dig in, he said. We go light, no vehicles. Elena listened, eyes tracking the route. That ridge, that slope, and the hollow to the north, the same one where the wind curled back on itself, killing sound completely. A perfect kill zone. But they'd see her coming this time. Word of a female sniper had begun to spread. The enemy was setting traps looking for her. They are hunting you now, she thought, adjusting her gloves. Let them. The march-in was harsh. A crosswind scoured their faces until even the men began to curse, teeth clacking, fingers clumsy on their weapons. They dropped into the riverbed to cross under the highway, a cold black gash in the snow, then climbed back up, breathing heavy. At checkpoint Echo, they paused. Elena went forward alone, crawling on her belly through a drift that stank of engine oil and burned rubber. A half-buried truck rusted out, made for good cover. Through her scope, she scanned the valley. First shape standing guard, shifting from foot to foot, too jittery, young, inexperienced. Second shape, crouched eyes on a field radio. Third, she almost missed. A glint, glass, a scope. He was hunting her. Her heart didn't race, it dropped low, steady. She slid back behind the truck, breathing through clenched teeth. He knows I'm here. He's waiting for me to fire first. She weighed her options. Move left too open, backtrack expose, stay put death. Her father's voice steady as a Montana night, a hunter never runs. A hunter waits for the wind. Elena settled in, pressing deeper into the ice, eyes narrowed. The wind was shifting. A squall tore across the ridge, lifting powder into a screaming white curtain. For 2 seconds, maybe 3, no one could see a damn thing. She fired. The bullet caught him square, punching through the enemy sniper's mask, snapping his head back like a rag doll. She didn't stop to celebrate. rolled right, broke position, scurried downhill as a second shot tore through where she'd just been. They brought two. She realized a rush of cold slicing through her. This wasn't an ambush. This was a hunt for her. She gritted her teeth, sliding behind a boulder, scanning for the second hunter. Movement. North Ridge. He'd moved after her shot. Good. He was smart. But she was smarter. She let him think she'd retreated, left a line of footprints in the drift, then backtracked low, crawling flat on her belly until her fingers screamed. He followed the false trail just like she hoped. When he stepped into the shallow basin, Elena was already prone, scope locked on the center of his chest. He saw her at the last instant, a look of pure shock. She pulled the trigger. His body crumpled. The basin went silent again, save for the wind. Brooks reached her 20 minutes later, eyes wide. "Jesus, Madsen," he rasped, staring at the two sprawled shapes. "They came for you." She didn't reply, just picked up her spent brass and pocketed it. Brooks let out a shaky laugh, half admiration, half fear. "Remind me never to piss you off." Elena's only answer was a faint smile, and even that vanished when she turned toward the next ridge, scanning, always scanning, because hunters never sleep. The storm returned at night, thicker than any before, crushing sound and sight beneath an endless, howling white. Temperatures sank so low, metal snapped if you breathed wrong. Frost gathered on eyelashes like crystal thorns. Delta Squad had orders to pull back to base and regroup, but Brooks was down an unlucky slip on the ice, a fracture that left him barely able to stand. Comms were intermittent, cutting in and out with static. They had no choice but to dig in and hold their position until rescue. They posted a rotating watch. Each man took a shift, eyes glassy, teeth chattering, scanning a nothingness so complete it could swallow reason whole. When Elena's turn came, she didn't complain. She crawled out from under the half-collapsed lean-to they'd built, taking her rifle with her belly to the ice. A hunter does not fear the dark. She let the cold crawl into her bones, let it sharpen her. Out in the emptiness, somewhere beyond their circle of breath, and fear shapes moved. She could feel them. Enemy scouts creeping up, testing their line. She steadied her breathing slow and deep. Hours passed. No sign, no shots, only the wind trying to peel the skin off her face. Then a sound. A soft crack of crusted snow breaking under weight. Elena shifted her rifle a fraction, letting the scope cut through the murk. Nothing but white on white, except there a stutter in the pattern, a deeper shadow gliding where it shouldn't. One. Her finger tightened. The shape flinched, toppled backward without a sound. Minutes later, another shadow. Two. Another one fell. There were more coming, she could sense it. A slow tide of figures testing the perimeter. Delta had to be ready, but the men were half dead from cold, half dead from fear. She couldn't count on them. She had to stand alone. By dawn, 5 bodies lay scattered beyond their pitiful line of defense. Elena never left her belly-down position, never let herself shiver, never closed her eyes. The 6th came close, too close. He made it past the drift, nearly into their camp, before she put a bullet through his chest, one clean shot through a night that had almost crushed her. When the sun rose pale and exhausted over the ridge, its light revealed what they'd survived. Delta stumbled out of their shelters, wide-eyed, blinking, coughing into their scarves. They saw the fallen shapes first. Then they saw her still in the snow, rifle resting, steady face smeared with half-frozen ash like a tribal war mark. No one called her pretty toy. Not anymore. Hours later, evac birds roared overhead, blowing up plumes of powdered ice. Medics dropped in wrapped blankets around half-frozen men, checked vitals, stuck them with warm IV fluids. A tech tried to pull Elena away from her scope. She shook her head. "I'm good," she rasped, voice hoarse with cold. He stared at her face, the black war paint frozen in thin cracks. "You're sure?" She nodded. The tech swallowed, then stepped back. "Okay." They let her stand there as long as she wanted, scanning the ridgeline, refusing to look away. Because she was the only reason any of them were alive. The ride back to base was a blur of engine noise and rotor wash, the black steel of the helicopter rattling like a dying heart. Elena barely registered the medics fussing with the wounded or the chatter of exhausted soldiers trying to reassure each other that they'd made it out. She sat in a corner, cradling her rifle across her knees, eyes locked on a fixed point just beyond the open ramp. The wind whipped at her hood, tugging her braid loose, but she didn't flinch. It wasn't numbness, it was something deeper. Stillness. The same stillness her father taught her when she was 9 years old, learning to hunt elk in the Montana timberline. When the world is loud, you get quiet, he'd said. When the world is bright with panic, you dim yourself until only the target exists. The helicopter jolted as it touched down. She rose in one smooth motion, stepping off before anyone called her name. The air on base felt different, thicker somehow, pressed close by the rumors that had already arrived before them. They called her the White Ghost, the pretty toy who had become death in the snow. Brooks limped across the tarmac, a pair of crutches under one arm, his voice rough from painkillers. "You good, Madsen?" She nodded. "You saved us," he went on. "Don't think any of us missed that." She shrugged, eyes distant. "I didn't do it for medals," she finally answered. Brooks studied her. Then he laughed, a low, tired sound. "That's why you're dangerous." In the barracks, the squad gathered around cheap plastic tables, soup steaming in dented mugs bread, hard enough to chip a tooth. The normal jokes felt forced, and no one called her Barbie anymore. They looked at her the way men look at a lightning strike, grateful it wasn't aimed at them, but wary all the same. She sat a little apart, polishing her rifle the way someone might cradle a rosary. Daniel's the youngest of them, finally asked. "You ever get scared?" Elena paused, set down her rag. "Scared?" He nodded, too embarrassed to meet her eyes. She considered her answer, then spoke softly. "Every time, but I move anyway." He nodded, swallowing, and didn't ask again. Later that night, she found her bunk too small, too warm, too loud with the breathing of so many other survivors. She stepped outside into the frozen yard, letting the wind bite at her raw skin, welcoming it. She unclipped a tiny locket from around her neck, the hinges creaking as she opened it. Inside was a photo, blurred and yellowed, her father, one arm around a girl no older than 10, smiling. She traced the edges with a glove. "You were right," she whispered into the night. "It's in the quiet." And for the first time in weeks, she let a tear freeze on her cheek. Spring in Alaska was a lie. The snow only softened enough to swallow your boots, the wind traded knives for claws, and the light stayed thin and cold. It was during that false thaw that the orders came, a new training cycle, a new class of sharpshooters to shape. Brooks, leaning on a cane, found Elena on the range. She was adjusting the scope on a battered M40, fine-tuning each tiny shift with a precision that made even the sergeant shake his head. "They're offering you OCS," he told her, voice flat. She didn't look up. "I know. You gonna take it?" Elena paused, then softly, "Maybe." Brooks nodded. "These kids, they'd follow you. They'd learn. You sure as hell proved you can lead." She exhaled, slow and cold. "Leadership," she murmured, "isn't yelling." Brooks smiled, eyes crow-footed with exhaustion. "No. Sometimes it's pulling the trigger before anyone else sees the target." He left her there, standing alone, rifle in hand, staring through a scope at a world she had once only dreamed of surviving. Her first student was a boy barely 19, all elbows and oversized boots, his voice still cracking when he spoke. "How do you stay calm?" he blurted on the second day. Elena considered him, reading the honest fear in his posture. "You don't," she said. "You just slow everything down." He blinked, confused. She smiled, faint and quick. "Think like the blizzard," she explained. "Cold, quiet, unstoppable." That night after drills, the squad gathered in the mess hall. Eddie had scrounged a battered deck of cards, challenging anyone to a game. Elena found herself drawn into the circle. They dealt her in without hesitation. As she took her seat, Eddie grinned. "Still a pretty toy," he joked. But there was no malice behind it, only the comfort of a nickname that had changed meaning. "Yes," she answered, shuffling the cards with practiced fingers. "Pretty dangerous." The table burst into laughter, and for the first time she laughed with them. Later, alone under the stars, she returned to the ridge overlooking the perimeter. The sky was clear tonight, a knife edge of blue blackness stretching forever. She opened the locket again, the one that carried her father's faded photo. You come from fire and shadow, Nat. Walk quiet, but never walk small. She let the wind take those words, let them settle into the snow, let them anchor her in this new place, this new life. Because she was no one's toy, no one's trophy. She was the hunter, and in the blizzard she would never be lost. If this story reminded you of someone who fights quietly, loves fiercely, and refuses to break, share it. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe and follow. Because sometimes the most powerful voice in the world is the one that never had to shout.